Neon Genesis Evangelion. Upon hearing these three sacred words, certain things may come to mind. An unreasonably catchy theme song. More licensed brand goods than Japan knows what to do with. Or, more likely, some of the most well-directed and interestingly edited anime episodes ever to grace the cathode ray screen. But would it surprise you to learn that there's a manga? Probably not. What would surprise you is that it might be one of the best versions of Evangelion. Indeed, I am usually the last person to recommend extraneous, post hoc multimedia tie-ins. Evangelion is, for better or for worse, known as one of the earliest and most prime examples of original TV anime. That is, anime not based off of a manga or any other source material. Nigh inconceivable in the year of our Lord 2025. And Evangelion being such a prime example of the power and uniqueness of original anime, recommending this seeming cash grab manga would almost feel like botoku. However, what if I told you that this manga is genuinely incredible? That it might just live up to the legacy of its source material, and in some ways even surpass Hideaki Anno's original vision? Well, stay tuned and you might just find out. Hello, I'm Nicholas and this is Renaissance Manga. If you consider yourself an anime otaku, manga connoisseur, or Japanese cultural enthusiast, feel free to subscribe. And even if you don't, subscribe anyway. We take everyone. I've got more essays and vids to come for all you manga heads. Now, on to the main affair. After failing to launch the sequel for Royal Space Force, The Wings of Honemae's, Hideaki Anno was desperate for his next big hit. You see, Anno was a maverick of an animator who first gained notoriety and Miyazaki's lifelong admiration and respect for his work on Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. In the early 80s, he brought together a group of up-and-coming animators, many of whom were still in art school, and formed an amateur animation circle, Daikon Film, which would be formally founded as Gainax in 1984. Anno and the studio would go on to produce Royal Space Force, The Wings of Honemae's, Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, and one of the best animations ever crafted by human hands and hearts, Top Onerae Ganbasta. Looking back from 2025, the history of Gainax would be marked by two main characteristics: incredible otaku-centric animation experiences and terrible financial mismanagement. So, in 1992, desperate to make something happen, and far from ideal economic conditions, Anno would have a chance meeting with an outside producer who would give him that extra push. Anno finally found that special something and pitched Shin Seiki Evangelion, which we can translate as New World Chronicle Evangelion. A story of a lonely young man forced to fight angels in a biomechanical monster. Anno and this producer were betting on success. Little did they know just how successful Evangelion would truly become. In the intro, I implied that this manga was produced post hoc, that is, after the fact. And this is both true and false. In what is perhaps the weirdest way to launch a franchise, the anime, having been in pre-production since 1993, launched in October 1995, 7 months after the manga launched in Gekkan Shonen Ace in December of 1994. Yes, the manga was originally released as a sort of teaser for the anime to come. While certainly unusual, not a bad way to market your show in hindsight. In any case, Evangelion is unquestionably Anno's original work, and the manga was, at least at first, closely based off of that vision. In fact, by the July 1997 release of the then series concluding feature film, Shin Seiki Evangelion, Gekijouhan Ea, Magokoro Kimi ni, known in English as The End of Evangelion, the manga was only up to its 24th chapter, roughly landing it somewhere in the middle of the anime's 9th episode, chronologically speaking. So, it is safe to say that Sadamoto had the outline of where the manga would be far in advance of its execution. Up until the first 5 volumes of the manga, the plot differences between the two works were ancillary. we briefly see Rei piloting Eva 01 at the beginning of the story. Or Shinji, not Misato, being the one to invite Kensuke and Toji into the entry plug. The manga's story, while fundamentally still sticking to the core plot beats of the Eva anime up until the very end, begins to diverge in a significant way, minor spoiler alert, in chapter 32, when Asuka inadvertently causes Shinji to witness the reveal of Adam, along with Misato and Kaji. While this doesn't affect the plot too significantly, it does create a difference in Shinji's characterization that really only compounds as the manga's story develops further. Other major plot differences include the absence of episodes and scenes that could be considered more filler, and the wholesale removal of Angel's Sandalphon, Matriel, Iriel, and Leliel. Asuka's aquatic debut is relegated to a single panel. She is thrust into the narrative practically assuming the audience already knows who she is. But I can assure you that these minor changes, while potentially irksome to some of the more hardcore fans, don't really detract from the overall experience of the manga. And yes, this manga is indeed an experience. The creation of a manga is an incredibly personal feat. To make a film analogy, the humble mangaka assumes the role of director, draftsman, editor, and cinematographer. Indeed, many manga productions in Japan consist of a skeleton crew, usually the artist and a couple of assistants. And as far as I can tell, the Evangelion manga was no different. Thus, it is no exaggeration to say that the skill of the mangaka directly determines how good a work will be, tie-in or not. And Yoshiyuki Sadamoto just so happens to be a top-class mangaka. Yes, if there is one sole reason to let this manga grace your life, it is the art. Sadamoto's art is simply incredible, and we'll get into just exactly how it is incredible. But first, beyond that, what's truly amazing is how consistent the visual presentation is with the original anime. I'm not gonna lie, for me, one of the major hurdles to getting into works that tie in to pre-existing IPs, particularly in the case of manga tie-ins, or even anime adaptations, is that so often the art direction is so different from the original that it feels alien, and in some cases even insulting. When I look at the FLCL manga cover, I can't help but go, ugh. But in the case of the Evangelion manga, the aesthetics are shockingly consistent between works. And there's a reason for that. Remember that group of art students I mentioned earlier? Well, among those founding members of Studio Gainax, whose names can be found etched in the credits of the bootleg Daikon 4 laserdiscs, was Yoshiyuki Sadamoto. Yes, he was there since the beginning as an animator. Throughout the 80s and 90s, and even into the aughts, he worked primarily as a character designer and illustrator for works such as Nadia, Furikuri, Die Buster, and even non-Gainax works such as the Dot Hack franchise. And of course, the crowning achievement of his entire career is his decades-long work as character designer, illustrator, and mangaka for the entire Evangelion franchise. He was there from day zero, when the concepts for the original TV anime were being drawn, all the way up until the final rebuild film, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, was released in 2021. This close involvement with the original production, and every iteration of the franchise since then, in my opinion, gave Sadamoto unprecedented levels of artistic and narrative insight and personal investment in the series, which allowed him to elevate the Evangelion manga to, as the kids say, truly goated status. Indeed, I think that it would not be too much to say that Sadamoto could be considered a co-creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion. He was there from the beginning, and has even gone on record saying that he considers the writing of the manga his own sole endeavor, without help from anyone else. From an artistic perspective, I truly feel that he was only comfortable in saying this because he feels that he contributed something meaningful to the original development of Eva. To what degree is up to interpretation, but hey, the manga speaks for itself. Now, let's jump into just how Sadamoto's manga is just so gosh darn good. During the 80s, Sadamoto primarily plied his craft as a character designer and illustrator for Studio Gainax. While he did try his hand at some manga in the early 80s, I don't think it's in bad form to say that he was, and still is, primarily known and renowned as an illustrator. So believe me when I tell you that his illustrator's pedigree is put to full use in Evangelion. In fact, upon first viewing the Evangelion manga, I won't lie, a little voice rang in my subconscious. Oh, they just used the anime promo material for the cover. It can't possibly look that good on the inside. Well, it does look that good. Better even in some chapters. And this brings us to one of the manga's strongest and most immediately striking aspects, the character designs. Yes, when opening the first pages of Shinseiki Evangelion, perhaps the first thing one will notice is just how incredibly clean and consistent each character is, and how utterly faithful to the anime each character is rendered. Consistent character models and line work in manga is a truly fickle thing, with some mangaka excelling more or less at the craft. For Sadamoto, it comes as easily as breathing, or at least it appears that way. Throughout the course of the manga, Shinji, Misato, Asuka, Gendo, the Shogoki, they all look so consistently perfect that it ends up feeling more Evangelion than Evangelion. And due to the manga format, there are a greater range of tones and expressions that the characters can more fluidly, express, thus leading to an enhanced sense of depth and breadth to the characterization. I recall during the days of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood's release, a common criticism lobbied against Studio Bones' production is that Arakawa's comedic timing did not translate well into the medium of animation. Too slow, stilted, jarring, off-tone. This manga creates exactly the opposite phenomenon. The comedic cuts, timing, and expressions have never felt more at home than in Sadamoto's manga masterpiece. But the art ain't just there to look pretty. It serves a purpose, and indeed differentiates itself in distinct ways from its anime counterpart. Primarily, certain classic scenes from the original anime are, while still present, given an entirely different focus and vibe, for lack of a better word. Let us take Shinji's battle with Shamshel, the fourth angel. Beat by beat, the sequence essentially plays out exactly as it did in the anime. However, to my mind, the signature moment in the battle is when Shinji finally loses it. At the end of his rope, almost out of battery, classmates in the entry plug and Misato yelling in his ear to retreat, Shinji finally has enough, disobeys orders, and engages his progressive knife. What follows is an intense, musically timed countdown sequence that culminates in Shinji just barely eking out a victory, milliseconds before the Shogoki loses power. An absolutely iconic, pulse-pounding moment from the original anime. But in the manga, it feels totally different. While the same events play out, Sadamoto chooses to forego the culminating snap that occurs in Shinji's psyche, and instead focuses more on the reactions of the other characters as the final moments unfold, creating a more tense, dynamic super robot fight, rather than an almost disturbing psychological breakdown in the cockpit. Another angle that Sadamoto tackles is the world building. While the original Eva anime really only hints at the goings-on of the various shadowy organizations, or the angels' true motivations, and just what exactly human instrumentality even is, the manga explicitly carves out sections of the narrative to more clearly explain to us, the audience, and Shinji himself what is really going on. And he often couches these expositional addendums in scenes of espionage and intrigue. Perhaps the foremost added tone, one that is barely present in the original anime at all, is that of Hitchcockian thriller-esque suspense. If you couldn't guess already, most of this is added in Kaji's plotline, which greatly benefits from this expansion pack of a manga. You see, what Sadamoto has done is create a version of Evangelion that takes less of a solipsistic, laser-focused view of Shinji's perspective, and instead spends a little more of its time fleshing out Eva's world. And honestly, I'm here for it. We already have an Evangelion. Several, in fact. In my humble opinion, these differences do nothing but, for the most part, enhance the experience. And please, don't get me wrong. So much of what is good about the original anime is still present. Unbelievably so, in fact. The off-kilter, ponderous static shots of the series environs, which would become a visual language unto itself for the next 2 decades of anime to come, Sadamoto emulates the technique with masterful execution. The ultra-widescreen, super Panavision-like finale that is the end of Evangelion, Sadamoto recreates some of the most evocative shots of the movie so well, I'm half convinced he did the key animations himself. Or how about the sleek yet complex biomechanical designs of Nerve HQ and the Evas themselves? Never looked better than in the hands of this meticulous master. Yes, from a graphic design perspective, this manga might be the ultimate form of both Eva's characters and world. The visuals, the pacing, the panel flow, they're so on point. You can feel your synchronization rate ticking up page by page. And if this breakdown's got your sync rate pushing 400%, and you want to become an official manga head, hop on to the Patreon. It helps a ton, and the link's in the description. Yoshiyuki Sadamoto began this manga in 1994, and finished it in 2013. It is the 20-year spanning magnum opus of one of Japan's premier anime illustrators. The only reason why he isn't really known as one of the GOATs of mangaka, along with Urasawa, Miura, or Shirahama, is because he was working on this the whole time. And I fear that the Evangelion manga has been rather unreasonably, yet understandably, cast aside into the bargain bin of promotional or off-brand Eva material, along with Razafan or Sousei no Aquarium. Now, this is where one might ask, okay, so it looks good, but how's the story? Setting aside the fact that I believe no one can ever truly separate the narrative body of a work from its aesthetic soul, I would say, pretty darn good. While certain aspects of the anime were removed that I take small umbrage with, the core plot lies intact and narratively effective. The crux of the story, which is and always has been Shinji and Misato's relationship, remains as strong as cold steel, and is in some instances tempered even further. But let's dive a bit deeper into the meaningful differences. From here on out, spoiler alert for major plot points and the end of the manga. First of all, let's take the fourth child plotline. In the anime, this mini arc serves as a brief but dark spot, an omen of the darker areas the plot would soon turn to, never to return to the episodic Monster of the Week school days show that Eva nominally purported itself to be. But due to Anno's own unique directing style and perfectly dour writing, the show was already in a pretty dark place. Now, contrast this with how Sadamoto handles the same plot in the manga. Yoshiyuki Sadamoto had kept Shinji a literally stronger-willed character, and honestly, had kept the entire tone of the manga markedly lighter than its anime counterpart. And in the beginning of the arc, he puts a little extra legwork to flesh out the relationship between Toji and, Incho? Thus, the emotional gut punch that is the corruption of the fifth Eva by Bardiel, and Gendo forcing Shinji to murder his own friend by uncontrollable, dummy-possessed hands, turns into an emotional disembowelment. And the coup de grace comes with the decision to actually have Toji die, a choice the original anime was ironically unwilling to make. Don't get me wrong, episodes 18 and 19 work incredibly well, but I really do think the manga tops them. Now, on to the finale of the anime, where the real differences lie. The final section follows the end of Evangelion quite closely, right up until the moment when Asuka faces off against the mass-produced Evas. In a far more positive, and quite honestly emotionally welcome twist, Sadamoto decides to have Shinji make it in time to save Asuka from her unfortunate fate. This doesn't successfully prevent the third impact, but it does provide tonal foreshadowing for the climactic turn. You see, throughout the series, Sadamoto literally gives Shinji more information on Nerve, Seal, the Evas, Adam and Lilith, and his mother's death and soul capture, mainly via Kaji and Misato. This allows for Shinji to have more agency, and critically, make a different choice when faced with total apocalypse. And the choice he does make when Rei 4 grants him dominion over all creation? To remake and reset the world. To grant himself a chance at peace and a happy ending. To maintain the AT field between souls and stop instrumentality. A bit cliche, I know, and I also can't help but wonder if Sadamoto had, at some point, seen and subconsciously channeled Razafon when he penned this happy ending. And I also can't help but wonder if this is what all those Japanese superfans wanted, all the way back in 1997, when they had a collective breakdown at Hideaki Anno's twice bulking of their wish fulfillment-fueled desires. Now, I like the end of Evangelion. I like how dark it gets, and I do think it closes the circle on the questions, oh, so you think you want to pilot a robot, to be in the entry plug, to desire and be desired, and to fureao another ningen? You sure you're ready for that, bub? But considering this work really is a kind of retelling that concluded 16 years after the end of Evangelion's release, the happier ending really does work for me. And I'm sure Anno had this fact in mind when he concluded his rebuilds almost a decade after that. To conclude, I want to answer that last nagging question that I'm sure is, by now, lingering in the back of everyone's minds. Now that he's said all this, which version does he think is better, anime or manga? And I still have to go with the anime. Anno's directing and editing is just so fast, unique, and energizing. The feeling of watching Neon Genesis Evangelion is truly an experience like no other. And Shiro Sagisu's soundtrack only adds to this, not to mention the iconic vocal performances. But if you consider yourself to be a fan of Evangelion in any capacity, I implore you to check out this manga masterpiece, especially if you haven't seen the series in a while, your mind having slightly forgotten how all the pieces fall into place. Then honestly, the manga might be the perfect alternative, only increasing the enjoyment of a re-experience half forgotten. Save the rewatch for another year. Thanks for watching Renaissance Manga. My last video on Angel Punk really took off, so huge thanks to everyone who made that happen. I seriously appreciate the support. If you haven't seen it yet, it's linked on the screen and in the description. We've also got a Discord now, and all are welcome. Come hang out. More videos are on the way, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.